Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And today I want to talk about the risk and taking that risk. One of the most common questions I get from people when I'm telling them stories about traveling or how I've been living my life for the past 15-ish years is, isn't that risky? Oh, I don't know if I could take that kind of risk. Which seems like common sense until you look at the risks you're taking by not traveling. Now, the first immediate concern of most Americans listening to this podcast, and I imagine most people, is having a job and the compensation they get for it. A lot of people are worried that moving abroad would mean risking the job they have, or risking their access to a job. Now, as I've talked about many times before, if you are a fluent English speaker, you have a job abroad, or online if you don't want to teach in person. Dozens of countries have thousands of jobs today waiting for fluent English speakers to take up the mantle and speak a few sentences and have the students repeat after you. And something I think that is at least as important is that most people don't end up working in the field they studied in school, whatever they were educated in. Most people don't get a job in that field. It's well over half of all people have a job completely unrelated to what they studied in school. I just looked it up. 27% of people use their degree in the field they end up working in. So it's not like most people really choose where they end up working anyway, and that's certainly not the people I know. Very few of them ended up in the field they pursued or were educated in. Most of them ended up at the job that would allow them to work there. Why? Because they need money. They are willing to exchange their time for money. And this is where we can bring it back to the risk. Because isn't it risky starting a new job abroad? Well, how risky is the job you have now? Does your current job satisfy you? Is it fulfilling? Is the amount of time you're giving to your job equitable to your compensation? Does your quality of life reflect the amount of effort you put into your work or the amount of product you produce? Is it reflected in your bank account? In your free time to spend with your friends, or on your hobbies or creative pursuits? The answer is no for a lot of people. It certainly was for me. And it's okay if English teaching isn't your dream job. If you are not getting enough money or free time in the current job you have now, unless it is your dream job and you're sure that the sacrifice is worth it, why not do English teaching as a different job that may also not be your dream job, but will give you more money and more free time? I knew that the amount of work and effort and care I was putting into my job was not netting me enough to feel comfortable about the life I was living. I felt no financial security. I had very little free time. My hours were not of my choosing. And no matter how busy a day was or how much I produced, I got the same amount of money, and the people above me made more money depending on how much I produced. That seemed crazy because I was the one doing the work, and I was not the one making the money. And time is what we are risking. Our life is what we are risking, and our lives are finite. Unknowably finite. So how much of your time are you willing to give to someone else and put off doing what you want to be doing? If you travel, you can do what you want to do. Because a job is guaranteed, and it might not be the exact job you want, but it's a guaranteed $12 to $25 per hour speaking fundamental languages using a skill you already have, speaking English. So imagine if you were out of a job in the United States, and then someone walked up to you and said, "Hey, you have to speak English, and for every minute that you speak English, we'll give you 30 cents. So every hour, you get $20. You would probably do that if you were out of a job. I definitely would have done that instead of the service industry job I had in the States. That's what it is. The choice is right there, and it's that simple. And the idea of teaching was fine for me. I thought it would be interesting being a teacher. Plus, I would get to travel, try new foods, speak new languages. I'd get to do a bunch of stuff I liked. But even if that's not all the stuff you like, this is about risk, and there's no risk that you're not going to have a job if you decide to travel. And you can choose any job you want. You don't have to become an English teacher. By getting any remote job that pays you more than $500 USD a month, you'll be able to live in many countries for room and board for that amount of money. The cost of living while traveling is another factor in which taking the risk turns out to be what you've been doing by living in the United States. Real estate's obviously crazy there, housing is crazy. Apartments are insane in the United States. $1,600 for a suburban 2-bedroom apartment? If you're lucky. Living abroad, you can kind of take your pick of countries on every continent and live somewhere for $500 USD a month. If you already have a job, a remote job that can pay more than that, then you can live in 150 of the available countries instead of only 100 countries. But in terms of taking a risk while you are traveling, the cost of living abroad basically eliminates the risk of how much money you need to travel abroad. The difference in cost of living of the US versus most of the rest of the world is drastic, and I cannot repeat that enough times. If you are buying a new car, and there's a car that is $10,000, and there's another car that is $5,000. The $10,000 car is a color that was decided for you. You might like it, you might not. The $5,000 car is a color of your choosing. Other than that, the cars are identical. They're the same model, same features, same history, maintenance. They're identical cars, except for the car color, and of course the price. The $10,000 one was chosen for you, and the $5,000 one, you get to choose the color. Now, what are the risks of buying those cars? You could get in a car accident. You could get a car accident in either one of the cars. The risk is identical because it's the same car and you're the person driving. The car could break down. Both cars are the exact same. They could break down at the same rate. They might be difficult to work out how to drive the first time. It might be a car that you're unfamiliar with the features of. Cars are the same, it's going to be the same thing. Whatever risks you are taking by buying that $10,000 car, you're taking the exact same risks and saving $5,000 by buying the $5,000 car. To me, that's basically what traveling looks like. Actually, the $5,000 car is safer in this scenario because you actually have guaranteed job security abroad, whereas you don't really have guaranteed job security in the United States. But this $10,000 car versus the $5,000 car, you're like, well, that would never happen in real life. But it is happening right now. It's known as the cost of living. The cost of living, I'm going to use Thailand because that's the first country I usually recommend people to go to, is critically different, critically more affordable. In that car scenario, it's more like the second car is $2,500 and the first one is $10,000 because $1,600 for a nice apartment in the States, you can get a nice, all utilities included, Wi-Fi included, private apartment for $400 in the middle of the city. So the risk of staying in the States, just at this basic cost of living of housing, there's $1,200 that you are spending every month that you could be saving instead. That $1,200 could come in handy for medical emergencies or a family member who needs a down payment on something or 100 other things. But by staying in the States, you are taking the risk of not having money that you could need someday. And it is just a choice. Choose to live in a country that costs $2,500 to $5,000 a month to live in, or choose to live in a country that costs $500 to $1,000 to live in a month. Now, maybe you'll make more money if you gave away 12 years of your life to some profession through college. You got on a track, you studied this one thing, you stayed at a job as an intern and you worked up, and now you're making the average of $60,000 US a year. The average cost of living in the US is $55,000 to $65,000 per year. It's basically all of the average income, the average annual income. That all goes to just expenses now. Nothing left over for urgent or emergency costs or debts. No, it didn't a generation ago or 2 generations ago, or frankly 10 years ago. But that's where it's at now. It's just about parity, or it's arguably parity, or maybe a little less. It's maybe 85% of all your income goes to basic living expenses. So how much are you saving? That's really important and fits into this cost of living thing. Yeah, maybe you're in the States and you have a job of $65,000 per year, but you're probably not saving any of that. You have to add in healthcare. If you have anything wrong with you in the States, anything you did save goes to that and it's gone by the next year. Plus taxes. Whatever else you manage to squirrel away goes to taxes, and that is gone. Now, if you live abroad, your cost is going to be $500 to $1,000 depending on how well you want to live, if you're working on saving money. But it's very easy to earn $2,500 per month working 20 to 25 hours a week teaching English online, or teaching English in person. And if you're living abroad for 11 months out of 365 days, you aren't paying taxes on any of that income, earned income specifically. And if you have medical expenses, you can get the same quality of care you would in the States at a much cheaper one-time price. There's no installment pays or anything like that. You break a leg, you go there, they fix you up, you give them $80, you go home. The Uber ride is $250 for a 10-mile ride. So these risks have to be weighed against the risks you are already taking by living in the United States, with the lack of infrastructure and civil care that comes with living in the United States. The lack of job security, the lack of savings, the lack of citizen provision. It could be a risk to travel depending on the country you choose to visit and how you choose to travel, but it is much more risky to gamble with your health, to allow some condition that might not even be particularly dangerous to sit around and fester just because you can't afford it. I did that. I had very intense tooth pain for years, to the point that I didn't chew on one side of my mouth for years, but I knew I didn't have the money to fix it. And when I finally had the tooth worked on, right before I left the US actually, because the pain was so bad finally that I hadn't slept in 3 days. So after basically breaking down and calling 10 clinics in a row and finding one with availability, I scheduled an emergency appointment, and the dentist took one look at my mouth and said, "This is the worst tooth I've ever seen. We have to do a root canal immediately." I was shocked for more than one reason. I was shocked that I had let a medical condition get as bad as it did, that I had normalized not using half of my mouth. I had normalized that for so long that when I got the first shot and I didn't have pain, I didn't know how to react. I had forgotten that you don't have to have tooth pain. That tooth pain isn't something everyone just lives with because you can't afford to go to a dentist. Now, that root canal cost me $2,000 something. And luckily, I convinced that dentist to hold off on charging me until I received my insurance from work for having worked there for 2 years or whatever it was. And I did that, and I was able to end up paying $750, something like that, or $1,250, I think. It was still pretty I still ended up paying for about half of it. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And it took me a long time to pay that down because I only had $100 extra per month, and I was working 40-something hours per week. But I was like most young service workers, and I just had you don't have any spare money. I assume it's much worse now, a decade later. I assume most service workers are working 2 jobs, because a lot of people I knew back then were working 2 jobs. So that's the kind of risk I know Americans are taking, because I was taking that risk, and I didn't even understand the type of risk I was taking with my health and my future financial well-being, my security in general. And I had no idea that there was another option. That all I had to do was buy a ticket to a different country, and my cost of living changed. It didn't shift gently. My cost of living went from about 90% of my take-home pay to about 25% within the span of the 18 hours or whatever it was it took me to get to China. And you don't have to go to China. The same could be true in Korea, certainly in Vietnam, anywhere in Southeast Asia, basically. Most countries in Central and South America. There are even cheap houses across Western Europe. $400 a month cheap if you live in the countryside. Everyone will think you're insane, and it'll be difficult to go shopping. But there are houses in Sweden for $600 a month. But you can also live in the middle of the city for $300 a month in, like I said, many, many countries in Central, South America, Asia, Eastern Europe. So when people ask me about the financial risk, or say that they can't handle the financial risk of moving abroad, it sounds absurd to me. It's like driving a car that is on fire and saying you can't risk getting out of the car because this is the car you know, the car that is on fire. I mean, especially in the States now. Women don't have access to medical care. All Americans don't have access to their civil rights. Just the abolishment of civil rights in general, due to Supreme Court decisions over the past 40 years, that makes living in the United States at all seem like a risk not worth taking to me, for many people. Especially if you don't have the money to buy your way out of trouble, which is how the American legal system works. On paper, you are equal under the law, or you were, until 2024. But it's an indisputable fact that if you don't have money, you face a harsher sentence in the United States. And let's talk about risk. 40 states in the United States charge you to stay in jail. Like, there's a guy robbed a bank without a gun so he could go to jail and get free healthcare. That's not really a thing in the United States for 4 out of 5 states. And even in those other 10 states, there are often healthcare exceptions, so you would still have to pay for at least part of your healthcare in most of those other 10 states. But yeah, in 40 US states, if you're in debt and you go to prison, you're not living on the taxpayer's dole. Actually, that's not true. You are living on the taxpayer's dole. But you are also paying $20 to $80 a night or more for the privilege of being in jail or prison. That's a huge risk. If you make a mistake and go to prison, or if the police or the justice system make a mistake, or they just don't like you, especially if you are in debt, every day that you are required to be incarcerated, there's a 4 out of 5 chance, if you're an American, that you are going to be paying money every single day, $20 to $80, more in some states, to be in jail. So you're going to get out with more debt. And if you look at the legalese of how police can charge you with a crime, how they can decide to pull you over and conduct a search, an unconstitutional search that does not bother police officers, it is very vague. It's often if a police officer has a reasonable suspicion. And you might think, hey, that means nothing. You're right, it means nothing. That means it means anything. They can choose to pull you over and destroy your life on a whim. That seems like a huge risk to me. Or if you have children, having them in an American school, there's a school shooting every other day, more than every other day, in the United States now. And that's just school shootings. Regular shootings, like mass shootings, happen every day. In 2024, it was 385 mass shootings in 365 days. So every day you're having another mass shooting in the United States. You're taking a lot of risks by living in the United States, is what I'm saying. And a lot of those risks are immediately vanquished by living in a different country. You still have all the privileges of being a US citizen, but you get to have those privileges abroad, where in a lot of respects you're going to have more rights than you do in the United States. You're going to have access to affordable education. You're going to have access to affordable health care. You will get due process in most countries, unlike the United States, where that's not required anymore. You can make a livable wage. You can save money while you're abroad and plan for your future. A reality that is impossible for most Americans living on that average income line. About half of all Americans are making less than $35,000 per year, according to the Social Security Administration and the U.S. Census Bureau. The poverty wage in the U.S. is $35,000 per year. And remember, the average annual cost of living in the States is close to $60,000 per year. So most Americans are barely making more than half of the average income. 10% are making less than $15,000 per year. Now, that can be devastating if you're living in a place like the United States, where everything costs a lot. But $15,000 per year is a very comfortable living in 100 countries, in a ton of countries. If you're making $15,000 per year, you're golden in most of Asia, most of Central and South America, and most of Europe. That's what, $1,300 a month or $1,250? That's great. Like I said, you only need $500 to live in most of those countries. $1,250, yeah, you're good. So the risk of traveling abroad, if you're listening to these episodes or my stories about teaching or just having fun and living abroad and seeing all these amazing sights and meeting amazing people and eating amazing food, if your thought is, I wish I could do that, but it sounds so risky, you have to measure that against the risk you are taking by staying in the situation you are in. Making a choice to do something, that is an active decision. But not doing something is also a decision that has an effect on your life. If you are trapped in a room, but you find out the door is unlocked, you can leave the room or you can stay inside that room. A lot of people stay inside that room. A lot of people choose the $10,000 car because that's what was given to them. But if the door is open, you are allowed to leave, especially, as I've mentioned, for fluent English speakers. You can use that skill, speaking fluent English, to guarantee you a job and a steady, comfortable income where you can get all of your necessities for living and also save money, while eating awesome food and meeting cool people in other countries and seeing sights you will never see in the States, like volcanoes. Go to Guatemala. They have 34 volcanoes and like 4 of them are active. It's pretty crazy. It looks like you're visiting the Pleistocene era. I just said one of the eras. I don't know if they had any volcanoes then. I mean, they did because it's the Earth, but... Do you have a hobby that you always wanted to pursue but never had the time to pursue? Or you could never see what your potential might be, what your actual ability at guitar or painting or basketball or journalism might be? Because while you're saving money abroad, you're also working less. That $2,000, $2,500 English teaching salary is for 20 hours, maybe 25 hours per week of work. So you are going to have a lot of extra time. You're going to have at least 60 extra hours every month to work on whatever you want to work on, to write children's books, or study EMT techniques so you can go into the medical field in the future. Whatever you want to do, you're going to have dozens of extra hours that you will not have if you are working in a job like most Americans work in the United States. Not having time is a lot more risky than having a bunch of extra time and a bunch of extra money. So is it risky to travel? In an absolute sense? Yeah, it's risky to travel. It's risky to eat chicken because you could choke on a bone. But is it as risky as the life you are currently living? Because when I took stock of my life in the States, when someone gave me the option to go teach English abroad, I didn't go because the opportunity was so good, because I wasn't convinced that the opportunity was real. I, like most Americans, knew nothing about the outside world or other countries. But I did know how risky my life in the United States was. I knew that I was spending more than 90% of my income every month and every year, and then I gave the rest to taxes and I had nothing left. And I calculated how much I would have after 30 years of working in that job, and nothing for 30 years added up to nothing. And I knew I would make a little more money, but I knew how much the managers of the store I worked at made, and they made a little more than me. But they were just about making those poverty wages that I told you about. So in the job that I had been handed, my career track, after a decade, would end up at a little over poverty wages in the United States. Or I could take the risk of going to teach English, which at the time I didn't understand was a sure thing. But I was risking so much by continuing to live in the States, and I was risking my mental well-being for sure. I was very unhappy because of all those things I mentioned before. No access to healthcare or higher education, no access to a career path I chose, no access to creative pursuits, no access to living my own life, basically. I just wasn't allowed to live my life how I wanted. I had to follow how the American capitalist system decreed American life should go. And that seemed like such a great risk to my well-being, if not my very existence, compared to traveling, which sounded pretty cool to me. I wanted to travel anyway. And then if this job was as it said it was, and it turned out to be exactly what it said it was, the numbers anyway, I got paid what they said I would get paid. I got paid more very rapidly. They give you a bonus in most English schools every 6 months or a year. And I worked the half amount of hours I was told I was going to work when I got to the school. Then all of those problems would be solved. I knew Germany had free higher education if I wanted to go back to school. I was aware that healthcare was cheaper in other countries, but I didn't pursue it for a couple of years. But once I did, I found out that affordable, accessible, high-quality healthcare is readily available in most countries, just not the US. So it was a perceived risk based on my own ignorance to travel for the first time. But in reality, it was far less of a risk than it would have been to stay in the United States. And I'm here to report that isn't it risky to travel abroad? No. If you're an American, not at all. You're getting rid of so much risk. You are throwing burdens off of your shoulders by traveling abroad. The risks of traveling in no way even match, much less outweigh, the multitude of advantages. And I am telling you, and you can talk to me, about those advantages. They are real and they are right there. They are very close. They are very accessible, especially for fluent English speakers. Or anyone who makes more than $500 a month. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you soon. Bippity boppity boo.